Steve, you said you were beaten by the police. Goes back 50, 60 years maybe. Arlene, you told me in private conversation.
67.
67.
Yeah.
Arlene, you told me that you had a great-great-great-grandfather who was a slave, actually. This has been going on a long time. As Steve said, you said you're tired, right? This has been going on a long time. Today, we hear this slogan, Black Lives Matter. It's become pretty highly charged. How do you feel? What is your reaction when you hear someone say, but all lives matter? What is your reaction to that when you hear that?
I can take that one. I think if Black lives don't matter, then all lives don't matter. And in looking at Scripture, in 1 Corinthians 12:26, it says, if one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. And I think just within this context, if we recognize that there is a group of people who are marginalized, who are suffering injustices, and we hear about it not only in our news feeds or on a global scale or even in our country, but we hear it from people who are sitting here within our church body, then we need to respond and support that part of our body. If one part of the body hurts, then the whole body hurts. So if we want all lives to matter, and we're recognizing that Black lives for a lot of people don't matter the same level as other groups of people, then we have to honor that, we have to recognize that, we have to rectify that in order to support that statement.
Mm-hmm. I think it's pretty clear, church, that our African American brothers and sisters, really the whole community, since the days of slavery and even before that, have not been treated equally. They have been marginalized. They've been treated differently. I think that's very clear. The question is, what are we going to do about it, right? So, Steve, you want to speak to that?
Well, it's you said treated different. We are treated different. For instance, when I went to school, graduated from high school, 12th grade, they would teach us how to fill out an application to get a job. And then they would teach them to get a business, to be a manager over. It's things like that. Just like most of you guys may not understand what we're going through. You walk a mile in our shoes, and then you know.
So for me, when I hear all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter, it sounds very diminishing. It sounds to me like you're trying to take away from the point that I'm trying to make. And I think it's important that we address that I don't necessarily know what Black Lives Matter, the organization or the movement part of it, like, their agendas or what they stand for. I think it's separate from the statement. And so maybe people might confuse the two, and just to say, well, if you say Black Lives Matter, somehow you are associated with the organizational part of it, which is not necessarily true for all of us. We are saying Black Lives Matter as to say the people who we are as African Americans need to matter in this country. And I saw a post that to me just kind of summed it up pretty good, and it said, we say Black Lives Matter, never said only Black Lives Matter. We know all lives matter. We just need your help with Black Lives Matter, for Black lives are in danger. That's all we're asking.
Amen.
Well, one thing I will say on that is that all lives, in my opinion, all lives do matter. And it's very important I think for people to understand that, the reason why. Because if you look at it and start saying, well, all lives don't matter, just Black lives matter, young children don't understand that. You have to educate them. When a young elementary school, middle school, even some high school to hear Black lives matter, they think, okay, only the Black lives matter. we have to educate people. Now, I don't like when people say everybody's bad, every doctor's bad, every preacher's bad, every preacher got a limo and a $500,000 car. I don't like that. Every police officer's bad. That's not true. I can prove that. What I teach my daughters and my family and my friends and my enemies, I say, there's some. I always use the word some. But it will come down to all lives matter. All lives matter. And that's the way I look at it. And I always will. I'll go to my grave thinking that. I'm not saying blacks have not suffered and Asians have suffered through certain things. Blacks have suffered through certain things. Everyone has suffered. And do I want things to go positive? Absolutely. But all lives do matter. And that's what I believe.
Yeah.
I would say for me, when I hear people say all lives matter, the thing I like pointing out first is that slogan did not come about until people started saying Black Lives Matter. So when you do that, I think you have to be conscious of what's the intention of coming up with that slogan. If I see Arleno saying Black Lives Matter, what's my intention by going, well, all lives matter, Arleno, you know what I mean? Because I wasn't saying all lives matter before people were saying Black Lives Matter. So I think that has to be a conscious thought. Like, you're sort of not only diminishing from the statement, you're stealing from it to make a point that I don't feel a lot of times is actually genuine, you know? It's not to say, like, it's not to make some, and then there's that part. And I also feel like what ends up happening with the Black Lives Matter statement, which to me, I feel like most people know on some level, like what they're really saying is like, Black lives should matter just as much as everyone else. Not more, not less, equality, right? But then people start doing all these academic dances around the slogan, all these semantics, and like, well, let's break it down. And like, and when you start seeing people do that, for me, what it feels like, it's diminishing, it's belittling, it's deflecting. Because I think everyone up here, all of us agrees, yeah, all lives matter. None of us want to be treated more or less. We serve a God who's impartial. Right. We serve a God who's a respecter of no persons. That's right. So that's like my visceral response, because I've been hearing it, and we've all been hearing it, over the years, like all lives matter. To me, it feels deflecting from what the intent behind Black Lives Matter is saying. Mm-hmm. And why are we talking about, why are we so focused on the slogans and all that stuff when we're not focused on like the actual pain and the suffering and the injustice and inequality? That's the thing we should be focusing on. But people will spend hours and weeks and write dissertations and all these, articles or do blog posts or do all these things around slogans. And meanwhile, there's people just being mistreated like left and right, That's how I feel about that.
Yeah, I have to echo Charles' sentiment that I just truly believe that All Lives Matter came about as, kind of a challenge to Black Lives Matter, or a way for people who to kind of belittle Black Lives Matter. I can understand, as James mentioned, that people may use it in a positive light. That youngsters coming up, that he makes a good point there. That it can be used in a positive way, but in general, when I hear it and when I see people use it, it tends to come off as they want to directly challenge or belittle the fact that Black Lives Matter. And I've heard many different analogies or way people explain. I heard one where if we're all sitting at a table, an Asian, a Latino, a Black, and the Asian, the Latino, the white, they all have a plate of food in front of them, and the Black person says, well, black people should have a plate of food also. And then they all, with their plate of food in front of them, say, well, all of us deserve a plate of food. Then, you're kind of not seeing the real issue here, that the Black person at the table doesn't have a plate of food. They're not being treated equally. And this goes back to the very foundations of this country. that in general, black lives have been belittled from the very Constitution that said that we were only 2/3, and we were just property. And then moving into basically, slaves were freed in 1865, and not until 1965 was the Voting Rights Act. So for 100 years it took for us to even get a voice, to be able to vote, let alone other freedoms. And then from there you still had de jure, right, with segregation and the Jim Crow laws and all these type of things. Through the times of lynchings and all that, it was just a time of terrorism in the black communities that we lived with, where people were, just like you saw the man on TV, they were lynched in public, left hanging on trees for the townspeople to go by and see, made of public examples. So for years, there's years and years and years of history and foundational desensitization to the loss of black life or the taking of black life. There were laws and rules that had to be changed. There have been many Band-Aids and fixes along the way. But just as I mentioned, if slaves were freed in 1865 and it took another 100 years just for them to get the fact to vote, and that was only, that's 1965, we're 2015, I haven't done the math, but it really hasn't been that long, maybe 50 years since we got the right to vote. There's still some freedoms. There's still some things left undone. There's still some freedom left to share. When you see like a man like Ahmaud Arbery, get shot and killed in the street, and those folks go home and eat dinner. If I was anywhere near somebody being shot and killed in the street, I'd be pulled in until they got it all cleared up. And so it's just been years and years from the foundation of this country of black lives being made less than, or like they don't count and like they don't matter. And so it's going to take years and years of putting focus on the issue that they do matter and changing that narrative. And that's where, in my opinion, Black Lives Matter comes from. Do I get angered or incensed when somebody says all lives matter? No, I kind of respect other people's opinions and their points of views, and I can see positive ways in which that could be used. But I feel the root of it was to diminish and belittle Black Lives Matter, and I think you take away from the focus on this idea that black lives have been diminished from the beginning of this country. I listened to a man, he basically helps death row inmates try to prove their innocence if our legal system has done wrong and justice is not being served. He said he was speaking at a conference in Germany, and he said Germany doesn't have a death penalty, and he said he said one of the German judges was astounded. He said, yeah, we could never have a death penalty after what happened with the Holocaust and everything, how we treated a whole group of people and killed people like that. But here in the United States, where a whole group of people, have been diminished for years through different phases of our history, they still put people on death row, and we still allow police to become judge, jury, and executioner in the street in a matter of seconds many times. And to overlook those facts is not to see the United States of America as a whole, right? There's a lot of good, and I think a lot of the good lulls us into complacency. But we have to have the conversation that Black Lives Matter, because for years and years and from the foundation of this country, the story in the streets has been told that they don't.
Mm-hmm. Well, Black Lives Matter. It's almost like a slogan, but then it is it goes back to the Revolution War. About the blacks when they were the Revolution War when they fight in Britain. They told the blacks, yeah, if you bear arms with us, we win this war, you win your freedom. Okay, what happened? We won the war, and they went back to slavery. You can't trust them. They'll promise you anything. But when it's over with, like what was that song? Didn't they have a slang somehow? You get 40 mules, get 40 acres and a mule? Didn't we supposed to get 40 acres and a mule?
Yeah, that was Lincoln.
Wasn't that supposed to be, where's the 40 acres? We didn't get a 40 acre, we didn't get a mule, we didn't get anything. And then we had to fight to try to get jobs. After slavery, you out there. Where you go? No work. You have to go back. A lot of them went back to their slave owners because they had to live and need to get shelter. But like their lives, you think my life don't mean a thing, because hey, whatever I do, it's gonna go back to the same. That's what people think. And you kill the blacks and just sweep it under the rug. Okay, he was in the wrong place. He shouldn't have done this and that. It's just Black Lives Matter because nobody else really cares about them. It's us. We care. We care about our lives. I don't care what nobody else says. It may not matter to nobody, but nobody else. It matters to us. And we just want to stand up for ourselves. We matter.
And that's a big reason why, we're here talking, because, to us, as a church family, your life does matter. And, I thought that was very insightful what you said, Charles, about when people say all lives matter, what's the thought behind that? That came up once people started saying Black Lives Matter. And so for many people, it's to shout over what's trying to be said, right? So some people are trying to diminish it or to speak over it. But then I've seen a lot of Christians trying to almost make it a message pointing to Jesus, which I think is a good intention, but what they're really doing is it's hurtful for a lot of people who are trying to have a voice.
From my point of view, I want to go back to the Black Lives Matter just quickly. To me, I look at it both sides, and it can also be the side of the enemy trying to cause division. Oh, we matter. Oh, we matter. So we have to be careful how we use it. I say Black lives should matter. When I look at my family as a grandmother and a great-grandmother, I look at my family. I can't sit there and tell my grandson, who is Cambodian Chinese, Black Lives Matter. I can't really express that to him. I can't express it to my grandchildren who are Italian and African American, because they have to know that all these races that we have sitting around, they all matter. Me now, I'm like the matriarch of my family. So I can't sit there and say, oh yeah, Black Lives Matter. They have to know they matter too. I don't want to take away who they are, because they have different races within themselves too. So yeah, all lives matter, but you need to recognize that Black do matter too. So that's the way I address to them. Yeah, Black lives should matter, but y'all need to recognize everybody here matter. So that's what I wanted to say on that. And then also you said, how can the church help us as African Americans? To me, I feel the church needs to recognize our gifts. We have gifts that God has given us. I had a dream that all this sitting here, those are all gifts that God has put out there, and they need to be opened. They need to be recognized for who they are. They need to be things that we say at church. They need to be accepted. I think suggestions need to be taken from us. Just like I heard a pastor say, you can have Black people on the worship team. You can have Black people sitting in the pews. You can have people doing all kinds of things, but is there Blacks on leadership in church? And that's how I feel sometimes. I do feel sometimes I'm being put back. And I try to say, okay, devil, don't come here. Devil, you a lie. That I'm not being racist at my church because of what my church is and who my church is. I love my church. But sometimes I feel I get all the love here I can get. I tell you, I'm filled up here with love. But sometimes I feel the compassion is missing. There's a difference. There's a difference. And that's how I feel sometimes. I don't know how they feel, but that's how I feel.
I would say, to echo off of Clovia, I think one thing you can do if you're watching and you're not understanding when we talk about systemic racism or institutional racism, and we're throwing out terms like Jim Crow or the Reconstruction period, and how blacks have been continue to be marginalized, and slavery has been repurposed, or you don't know mass incarceration, or a statistic like 1 in 3 African American males will be in jail within their lifetime. If all this is, new to you and it can feel overwhelming and you're like, I don't know where to start, I think educating yourself, I have the whole world in my pocket, with my phone. There are so many different resources to get educated and understand it. And I think that would help to wrap your mind around why Black lives need to matter and they should matter, and that focus should be there. I think also recognizing privilege as a lighter-skinned, mixed with Korean, female, I have privileges that I found that other Black women do not. Skin color, my education opportunities. When I was at Pepperdine, I took a survey on white privilege, and I remember one of the questions was, do you have issues finding makeup in a store? And I was like, what? I've never had an issue. And then I reflected and I thought, oh my goodness, sometimes when I go into Target or certain stores, I find my skin tone, but I'm one of the darker ones or the darkest. That's another step that my fellow sisters have to take, and that burden, and that's just one very small example. I have a privilege in that they don't. And I think sometimes, as you were saying, Pastor Greg, I would add on, it's hard to wrap your mind around it because you want to defend against it. Your mind wants to defend against it. You don't, it's heavy, it's painful, but I think education and acting is essential and necessary. And then the last thing I would say is to recognize that we are called to do good by God. We are called to action. We are called to rectify injustice. And so I would leave us with this. Galatians 6:9-10 says, and let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So then, as we have an opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith. And so maybe you can't change the whole system. Maybe you can't change your whole workplace, but you have a community, you have a place where God has placed you. If you know of someone who is African American or Black on your team, then how can you show grace to them? How can you be even more intentional in loving them? When I was walking last week, I had a 13-year-old Black male approach me, or he was walking in my direction. And just with all the events, I was like, you know what? I'm going to be intentional in seeing him and making eye contact and smiling. And when I mean he waved, and the demeanor that shifted in him, he was so excited. He felt seen. I could see it physically in his response. Those things, those things can go a long way, greeting people. And we should be doing that with everyone. But I think as we have drawn attention to, again, if a certain group of people has not experienced that within our world, as a church, we should be doing that even more for them.
I think you said so many great things, Brittany, and I also, because I know a lot of, with that said, I know a lot of Christians who are not Black that I personally know who will hear the word racist or racism, Jim Crow, segregation. They'll hear these words, and for them, it's so easy to dismiss the conversation of race because they'll go, well, I'm not racist. I'm not in the KKK. I don't call Black people the N-word. I have Black friends. I've dated Black people. You can go down that whole gamut. So when you ask someone, are you racist? Most of the time, it's super easy to be like, no, I'm not racist. I, until last night, felt for the first time a sense of hope after I talked to one of my brothers in the faith who's one of my best friends, and we were just sort of processed everything. I was like, dude, how do we navigate all this as being Black men and Christian? What do we say, especially to the church? You know what I mean? What do we want our brothers and sisters in the faith who are not our same race but ultimately serve the same God. And I think the question should go deeper than, are you racist? I think that's so jarring for people. They won't wrestle with that. I think the question everyone will wrestle with is, James 2, are you partial? The sin of partiality. I think that's what Christians, you can literally start today and ask yourself, and get in your prayer closet, how am I partial? Am I partial? If so, what does that look like, you know? And I think in churches, what does that look like? Are you, do you fellowship with people who don't look like you? In your accountability group, do you have black people in your accountability group? Is Hillsong better than Fred Hammond to you? If so, why? I think those are the subtle ways, you know what I mean? Our mission trip to Africa more appealing than like driving down 15 minutes to go to Compton. What did you think just now when I said Compton? You know what I mean? I think those are the things that no Christian, regardless of race, can sit here and just say, if I ask you, are you partial? No. Really? I don't know. I think the scriptures point that all of us, our hearts are all desperately wicked, right? I think we have to sit and wrestle with the word. I'm like, all right, are there ways I am like the rich man in terms of race where I'm like, sit here to certain people, or like sit over there or sit at my feet with, some of my other brothers and sisters in the faith? I think that's what Christians who are maybe turned off by the conversation of racism, they don't want to, learn about Jim Crow, they're tired of hearing about slavery. Let's just say that's not your jam, and all right, cool. Well, what do you think about the possibility of you having blind spots? I think that's one thing people in our church and the church as a body could start doing today. Now, black people could do that too, right? But specifically as it comes to like black people, how are you possibly partial? Even when our brother George Floyd got killed, when you go, well, what did he do? What is that when you ask that question? Man, I'm really upset that George Floyd got killed. Are you upset about all those gangbangers in Chicago who killed, in those shootings? What is that when you say things like that? Let's talk about police brutality in the black community. Let's talk about the single motherhood rate in the black community. Can we talk about what is that when you do that and your timing? Is it partial? Are you being partial? I think those are questions you have to be asking yourself, and hopefully, as you pray, and hopefully you can get in safe spaces with people who look like us, where we can talk and have even difficult conversations where there is grace, where there is mercy, because we all need it. I think that's one practical way of finding healing and understanding, because if you understand your own partiality, I think it would be easier to see like how it plays out in society, not just in the overt ways like crosses burning and like people being lynched. Those are the extreme, most vile and wicked ways in which it expresses itself. But there's other ways too, you know what I mean? Like even people who looted here, like getting pulled over by the cops for like no reason. I don't know one black friend or family member who has never been unjustifiably pulled over by the police. Never. I've never met one, especially my black male friends. I've experienced it at the UC Irvine when I went to Irvine. I've experienced it in the city that I live in. Getting pulled over, get a tow light, cool. Have you ever been arrested? Do you have drugs in your car? Why are you asking me that? What is that? It's not racism, it's him doing his job. All right, well, is he partial? If he is partial, how do we deal with that sin? Because it's a pretty big deal in the word. So I think that is something that I challenge everyone, especially as it relates to this, to wrestle with.
To kind of like piggyback and just echo that, instead of asking, are you racist too? Like, can we ask, are you anti-racist? Like, are you against racism, period, towards anybody? Like, can we be anti-racist? I don't want to see anybody with a knee on their neck. Like, it's not because, and it's not It's not being colorblind. It's seeing color and welcoming it anyway and loving it anyway. Like, my heart went out for George Floyd, not because he was a black man. I mean, of course, because he was a black man, but because it was any man. I don't want to see anyone die like that, especially not on video. His daughter has to live with that for the rest of her life. Someone is probably going to come up multiple times, and that video is like almost immortal. And, that when you said that, it just reminded me that, like, I think it's more about being anti-racist than it is asking someone, are you racist? And then also it's just about, in the Christian community, like, can we remind people that Jesus was always where the hurting was. He was in the middle of all the hurting, whether it was Gentile, Greek, or Jew. He was always where the people were hurting. And I feel like if Jesus was here now, he'd be in the middle of all these protests, and he'd be fighting for people who were hurting, people who were marginalized. And I feel like if we can also, like you said, just being mixed with black, being a lighter skin tone, like, we carry different privileges, but people who aren't black carry different privileges as well. And you can use privilege to protect those who are being marginalized, who are being, who have targets on them pretty much, who are being mistreated. I feel like I've seen that. I've seen so many different people of color and white people go out there with the protesters and pretty much use their body as a shield so the black protesters won't get hurt. And it made a difference. And I think, just realize that you have privilege and you can use that to help others as well.
We want to do better as a church, right? We want to help the church really come together, especially on an issue like this. What are some things that are helpful? What's not helpful?
Just treat me with respect. I demand that.
And so if you want to help, reach out to people and let them know that you're there in whatever way that they might need you. And if they can't express it, do something. At the very minimum, pray.